The majority of a person's strength is in the way they think, not in the restaurants they go to, not in the cruises they go on, not in the more things they buy. Those are all exterior. Those are all superficial. Those are not going to make a difference in you. The difference in you is going to make when you change in you. So this guy sells his property in Massachusetts, and then in order to get a tax write-off, he takes the money to buy some real estate here in Florida. So he buys some property right down the street from the synagogue, and he's so happy. He found a nice property. It's next to the synagogue. He thinks he's going to get customers from the synagogue. And the guy's a happy-go-lucky kind of a guy, But what happened was, since he paid cash, so he didn't have to have insurance, and he didn't get the insurance on it right away. But unfortunately, in South Florida, there are hurricanes. A hurricane came, and although he got a good price from the property, it wiped out his property. That's it. It wiped it out entirely. I mean, it was terrible. The guy got hammered. So there went all his money. You thought he was going to save taxes, but he lost his whole property. So he lost all his principal, all his money. Okay. Somebody else comes by and sees an opportunity. So somebody else came and bought that property. He bought that property for a more or less good price. And he's, a happy-go-lucky kind of a guy. And all of a sudden, the economy went down. This was, I think, in 2008. I can't remember when it was. But the economy went down. So this guy was not very happy because he wanted to build rentals. He wanted to build these higher upper class townhouses to sell at a premium price. But who was buying houses at that price at that time? He couldn't do it. So he had to lay out the money, and he built these, fancy homes because that's what it was designed. The permits were for that, even though the economy went down. And then when he tried to sell it, nobody was buying at that price. So he decided to go and rent. But what happened was, besides losing so much money, the renters, unfortunately, at this cheap price that he was renting these beautiful townhomes, trashed his townhouse. Okay, what's the bottom line of the whole story? The bottom line is that there's nobody in the world that can teach you and tell you, do this, that, and the other, and this is the answer. And that's my answer to joy and happiness. There is no do this, that, and the other, and then you're going to see those results. Okay, sometimes you can say do this, that, and the other, and your chances are better to seeing those results, and there's a little merit to that. But in the big picture and in the many different efforts that a person makes, maybe sometimes more than not, he's going to or she's going to see surprises, and they take care of their health, still doesn't help. It tries to invest in the right way, it still doesn't help. They get married and they do the right things, and it still doesn't help. Okay, they did well in finances, but they don't do well in the other area or in more than one area. And so really, again, it's the inner power that I'm focused on. It's the thinking the right way. And if you think the right way, that's going to influence the way you feel. And that's really where the strength is. The majority of a person's strength is in the way they think, not in the restaurants they go to, not in the cruises they go on to, not in the more things they buy. Those are all exterior. Those are all superficial. Those are not going to make a difference in you. The difference in you is going to make when you change in you, in your head and in your heart. Let me tell you another thing that is interesting to consider when thinking about the big picture, and that's reincarnation. It's a very, very powerful idea that mysticism discusses and talks about. The Arizal, the great Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who lived in the 1500s, and we're now 2023, so that's about 500 years ago. He lived in Sfas. He was one of, and his student, Reb Chaim Vital, they taught a lot about reincarnation and how that works. As a matter of fact, the Arizal Rabbi Yitzchak Luria himself said he was a reincarnation of a mohel, of a circumciser that was not such a good guy, wasn't so qualified, and as a result, he did harm to children. and the Arizal was a reincarnation of that mohel, of that circumciser, and as a result of that, the Arizal could not see blood. He didn't. The Arizal knew why, because he had a distaste for blood because of the problem that it brought about to people, and that his earlier soul, unfortunately, had to come back again into this world. And although there is so much opportunity living in this world and in serving God, and that's what we're so grateful every morning when we wake up, it's still a very hard struggle for the soul. So when you understand that there's such a concept of reincarnation, this explains a lot why there is sometimes, sicknesses in the world, that people are just born with this kind of a weak tendency. Or there are some people who have, everything just turns sour for them. Children that die, we should never know from this, that die young, or tzaddikim, righteous people who die early. And we can ask, how come, they did everything right? But that's the point that we're talking about. But there's a bigger picture. And it could be that child, I'll tell you a story about children, and it's not a very, a lot of these stories are not very pleasant, but that's the story that the books tell us. So everybody's familiar with King David. King David is the one that bought the place, the Temple Mount, to build on it the temples of the Jewish people, right? He paid for that mountain. And many of you may be familiar with the story with King David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba was really the wife of somebody else. And King David, he liked her appearance. So he sent her husband out to the front, and he died. And then he married this woman, Bathsheba. And even though King David did everything legally acceptable, it still was somewhat of what appeared to be not such a nice thing. You put your eyes on somebody else's wife, so you get her husband killed so that you can marry her. And so the story is that King David had a child from Bathsheba, but that child died. And died right away when the child was born in its infant. See? And what happened was, the books of reincarnation say that child was reincarnated in another child of King David, which was Absalom. Absalom was another child that was terrible, rebellious against King David. Right? He rebelled against his kingdom. King David had to run away for years because of this revolt from this son of Absalom. But Absalom, right? When you see this, you can ask yourself, but King David was such a good king. He did so much for the Jewish people. He composed and put together the book of Psalms. He was an actual portion of Adam's soul, the first person that God created, Adam and Eve, right? So King David was a actual piece of Adam's soul. That makes that very special, very powerful, very pure, very encompassing to be the right leader for all Jewish people. King David was incredible. And yet, why would he have a son like Absalom that gave him so much hardships and difficulty? And the books of mysticism explain that's because Absalom was a reincarnation of that child that came from the result of King David not acting in such a nice way. So what's the point that I'm telling you here with this reincarnation thing? That there is so much going on behind the scenes. When you realize that there's so much going on behind the scenes and the big picture of things, as we said, the tachlis hayadiyah, the absolute, so to say, goal of knowledge is not knowing that you don't know, that you can't figure it out. And that's why one of the best ways to manage stress is gamzu letoiva. Gamzu letoiva is one of the best statements that we have in the Talmud. Gamzu letoiva was by a person by the name of Nachum. Nachum, he taught us that when a person encounters these surprises that are not so pleasant, you answer to that experience, this too is for the good. And you can come to a point where you actually feel that it's for the good, even when you can't see that it's for the good. Like when you go to a doctor and he does something that hurts or is bitter. What do you say? How much should I pay you, doctor? Thank you for the for what you're able to go and do for me. The years that you went to school and the experience that you have. Thank you, doctor. This is for the good. That there is the technology, that there are the machines, that they'll be able to identify, they'll be able to address and deal with it. But it's not pleasant, the whole experience. But you've developed enough understanding that the education and that the experience of this doctor is good, is positive. Your mind and how and what you allow your mind to think is the key to everything. That's what I'm repeating again and again and again. What you feel, and we live in a negative world today, very, very negative. The news and the social media and the comparison is not good. It's very negative. It's bad. It's destructive. And there's lots of life that what we're talking about is really challenging, and it's out of our control, all these things. And so therefore a person's response to all these things by saying gamzu latoiva, this too is for the good, and what can I take out of it that can be a lesson on my road and on my path to good. This is so strengthening and so personally strong to give the person happiness and to give the person joy. And so two things let me leave with you, two Hasidic lessons. And one is from Reb Zusha, and one is from my own teacher of Mendel Futterfass. There was this great chassid, this great tzaddik, his name was Reb Zusha of Annapolis, and he was a student of the Mizritcha Magid. Don't worry if you're not familiar with all those names. These are big people. And he was about to pass away, and he tells his students, I'm crying, and I'm a little unsure. And they said to him, but what, you lived your life in such a righteous and spiritual way. Why are you so unsure? What are you so afraid of? And Rabbi Zusha answers, and he says, when I come up to heaven, my soul returns back to its source, to its creator. They're going to ask me, so what did you do in this world? What path did you take? Did you reach the destinations that were intended for you to reach? I'm afraid I'm going to not be able to answer that question with full confidence. I know they're not going to ask me, why didn't you take the path of Moses? Because I'll say, I'm not Moses. I know they're not going to ask me, why did you take the path of Rabbi Akiva? Because they're not going to ask me that question. I'm not Rabbi Akiva. They're going to ask, did you reach your own destination that was intended and that you were given the strength and the power to reach? And I'm not so sure that I reached my full potential. And for that reason, I'm a little anxious and a little bit concerned of how I'm going to answer. And that's really a very big lesson I want to leave with you. And that is to really be joyous and happy, even if you look at Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and all the other different things, don't compare your life to everybody else. Number one, what you see is not even the truth. People, you see how you see this picture behind me? I'm not in Israel. I'm sitting in my office here in South Florida. And that is, there's a huge percentage of people that are not happy. I've heard this from a lot of very wealthy people, that the majority of wealthy people are not happy. So what's all that money in the world worth? They're going on cruises and trying to get distracted from their unhappiness. They're marrying 3 or 4 times, and they're doing all kinds of parties. But how is that going to make them internally confident and joyous and happy and fulfilled? It's not. So the lesson from Reb Zusha is, don't compare yourself to anybody else. Their path is not your path. Their plate in front of them is not your plate that is in front of you. One very, very important lesson is to begin thinking in terms of, how do I make myself better every single day? How do I make myself better than I was yesterday? And when you feel like you're improving in your mental state, in your emotional state, in your contribution to the world, and you're doing a little better every single day, this is going to be one of the strongest sources of joy and happiness in your life. You're going to feel like you're growing. You're going to feel like you're becoming more and better in a real way. And that's going to give you the greatest sense of accomplishment. And number two, and I'm going to leave with this, Reb Mendel Futterfass, my teacher, my Hasidic mentor, he was in the Gulag in Siberia for 15 years. And I once heard him say at a Hasidic gathering, I don't know if it was at the beginning that he was sent to the Gulag, or maybe even before he sent over there to Siberia, with all the hardships and difficulty they had to live through there under Stalin in Russia. He said he made a decision in life that under all circumstances, he's going to be happy. He made a commitment. He made a decision. And he said that got him through life. That gets him through life. And that's a very, very important lesson. I remember from Reb Mendel Futterfass. He decided, he was aware and he was conscientious not to let his feelings and his emotions rule him. He decided that he was going to rule his thinking and his emotions. And that decision that he made, that he's going to be happy under all circumstances, is what got him through life. I heard this from his own mouth.